Why do we suffer when our body ages, when our emotions become unstable, or when our mind becomes agitated and restless? Why do we feel fear when illness arises, or when unpleasant sensations move through the body? Why do we get carried away by anger, joy, pride, or grief? The answer is subtle but simple. We believe these things are ours. We don't just have a body, we think we are the body. We don't just feel emotions, we believe they define us. We don't just think, we become the thinker. The core of suffering lies in identification. When we identify with our body, feelings, or thoughts, we build a false house of self, fragile, temporary, and vulnerable to every breeze of change. Yet, the teachings of the Buddha point to a different way of being, a way of looking at life without clinging to what is seen, felt, or thought, a way of observing the full spectrum of experience without calling any of it me or mine. This is the path of freedom, and it begins with something as simple as awareness. But not any kind of awareness. An awareness that sees clearly and lets go. An awareness that watches without grabbing. A mindful knowing that doesn't turn experience into identity. In the early teachings of the Buddha, there is a powerful and transformative method for this kind of seeing. It is known as the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Though often taught today as a technique for stress reduction or emotional regulation, its original purpose is much deeper. It is not merely to feel better, but to awaken, to uproot the causes of suffering at the most intimate level of experience. This teaching begins with a deceptively simple instruction. Observe the body as just the body, feelings as just feelings, mind as just mind, and mental phenomena as just that, phenomena. Over and over, the instruction is repeated. One abides observing the body in the body, feelings in feelings, mind in mind, and mental states in mental states, internally, externally, or both. One remains mindful that there is a body, there are feelings, and so on. This might sound abstract at first, but its purpose is radical. It is an invitation to experience life without the burden of self, to allow the body to be a body without claiming it as I, to feel pain without the narrative of my pain, to witness a thought without believing it defines who you are. This shift, from identification to observation, is the foundation of liberation. It is not about escaping the world, but about relating to the world in a new way. We are not asked to stop breathing, feeling, or thinking. We are simply asked to stop grasping, to stop building a story of I and mine around things that arise and pass away on their own. Because the truth is, everything we think we are, our name, our memories, our emotions, our body, is in constant motion. To build a permanent self out of impermanent processes is like trying to build a house out of flowing water. Mindfulness, as it is taught in this context, is not passive or vague. It is not a general attentiveness to what is happening. It is a precise, direct, and courageous presence that sees things as they are. When you observe the body, for example, you are not just aware that it exists. You observe how it breathes, moves, sits, walks, and ages. You see how it depends on food, temperature, and air. You see how it is subject to decay and death. And most importantly, you see that none of these qualities can be controlled or possessed. They arise based on conditions, and they change whether you like it or not. They arise when conditions support them, and fade when conditions change. By watching this process carefully, something deep shifts. The urgency to chase pleasure or avoid pain begins to fade. The chain of craving and reaction begins to dissolve. The same is true for the mind and all mental phenomena. Thoughts arise and pass. Moods shift like weather. Memories appear without being called. Intentions emerge without a fixed source. And once again, the invitation is not to control the mind or judge it, but to observe it, to know it deeply, without clinging. When this is done consistently, identification starts to crumble. You begin to see that you are not your thoughts. You are not your fear or your desire. You are simply the knowing, the awareness in which all these things arise. This practice of non-identification is not easy. It goes against the habits of a lifetime. We are trained to hold on, to control, to define ourselves by what we feel or think or own. But the Buddha offered a profound alternative. He taught that freedom comes not through becoming more or adding more, but through letting go, letting go of the false idea of self that wraps around every experience like a shadow. And what is left when this clinging drops away? A stillness that is not empty but full, a presence that is not bound by preference, a peace that is not dependent on any condition. This is the heart of the teaching, not to escape life, but to see it so clearly, so honestly, that the illusions of self can no longer hold power over you. The 4 foundations of mindfulness offer a step-by-step path to this kind of seeing. They do not ask you to believe in anything. They ask you to look, to observe, to be present. And in doing so, they open the door to a new way of living, a life of clarity, compassion, and freedom. This lecture will explore each foundation in depth. First, the body and its true nature. Then feelings, how they arise and fade. Then the mind, with its endless activity. And finally, the mental phenomena that shape our worldview and habits. And through it all, one thread will remain constant: the power of observing without identifying. The ability to see clearly without calling anything I or mine. This, above all, is the beginning of awakening. The body is the most immediate and undeniable part of our experience. We are born into it, we live through it, we die with it. Yet, despite being so close to it, most of us rarely look at the body as it truly is. We decorate it, train it, feed it, and try to control it. But all the while we carry a deep-rooted belief that this body is me or mine. When it looks good, we feel proud. When it is in pain, we feel cursed. When it ages, we feel betrayed. We suffer, not simply because of what happens to the body, but because we identify with it. The first foundation of mindfulness begins here, with the body, because it is the most concrete and visible doorway into presence. It is the anchor through which we can begin to develop awareness that is direct, honest, and grounded in reality. The instruction is simple: observe the body in the body. This means not through ideas or concepts about the body, but through the lived, breathing, moving, sensing reality of it. We are asked to return to the body, not as an object to be owned or improved, but as a field of observation, a process that is unfolding moment by moment. It begins with the breath. The breath is always here. It does not need to be invented or forced. We are simply asked to observe it, to be with the body as it breathes. Breathing in, we know we are breathing in. Breathing out, we know we are breathing out. This is not a technique to control the breath or to make it slower or deeper. It is a practice of being present with what is already happening. The breath becomes a mirror. It reflects the state of the body and the mind. When we are anxious, the breath shortens. When we are calm, the breath softens. But whether it is short or long, rough or smooth, we learn to watch it with equanimity, not attachment. From the breath, we expand our awareness to the whole posture of the body. Are we sitting, standing, walking, or lying down? The practice is to know the posture, not to fix it. There is no judgment or correction here. It is about knowing what is, not what should be. In sitting, we simply know, I am sitting. In walking, we simply know, I am walking. We begin to reclaim a kind of inner clarity about the most basic facts of our embodiment, and in doing so, we start to loosen the sense of ownership over the body. The body walks, sits, lies down, just as clouds float or wind blows, driven by conditions, not by a permanent self. In this way, the body becomes a subject of investigation. We start to notice its movements, its tension, its fatigue, its restlessness. These things are not our problems. They are natural processes. The more we watch, the more we see that the body moves on its own, not according to some inner command. The heart beats, digestion occurs, muscles twitch, all without any central controller. If we look closely, the idea that I move the body becomes less certain. What we find is that movements happen, actions occur, but the sense of an I behind them is just an assumption layered on top. The practice goes deeper when we begin to observe the body as a collection of physical elements. The body is composed of the same building blocks as the earth, the rivers, the fire, and the air. It is hardness and softness, warmth and coolness, motion and stillness. None of these qualities belong to us. They are just properties of matter. The body is simply nature expressing itself in human form. We begin to feel it not as me, but as a structure, a container, a system. This shift is not philosophical, it is experiential. Through direct observation, the body becomes depersonalized, not in a cold or detached way, but in a liberating way. We are no longer trapped inside it. To deepen this disidentification, there is a practice of contemplating the parts of the body one by one. Hair, skin, flesh, bones, organs, blood. Each part is observed as it is, without projection or judgment. We see that what we consider beautiful or ugly is simply a mental label. A strand of hair on the head is considered attractive. The same hair in food is disgusting. What changed? Only the idea. The body, when dissected into its parts, loses its illusion of selfhood. It becomes a collection of components, none of which can be rightly called I or mine. This is not meant to create aversion, but clarity. The body is not sacred or sinful. It is just a biological mechanism, made up of impersonal parts. Perhaps the most powerful and humbling practice in this foundation is the contemplation of death. In ancient times, monks were encouraged to meditate in charnel grounds, where decaying corpses were exposed to the elements. They would sit and watch bodies in various stages of decomposition, some bloated, some gnawed by animals, some reduced to bones. The point of this was not morbidity, but insight. By seeing the end of the body, one sees its nature. This body, too, will decay. This body, too, will rot and return to the earth. We carry this truth within us, but we often refuse to look at it. Through this meditation, we turn toward the truth of impermanence, not as an idea, but as a reality that applies directly to us. When we really internalize this, the identification begins to dissolve. We stop thinking of the body as something to protect at all costs, to beautify, or to possess. We stop believing that the aging or illness of the body is a personal failure. We stop reacting to every sensation as if it defines who we are. The body becomes what it truly is: a temporary vehicle for experience, a phenomenon that arises from conditions and will pass away when those conditions change. This does not lead to indifference. In fact, it often brings great compassion. When we see our own body as fragile and impermanent, we begin to see all bodies that way. The arrogance of youth, the obsession with image, the hatred of weakness, all begin to fall away. In their place, a quiet understanding emerges. This body is not mine. It is not me. And the same is true for you. We are all travelers in temporary shelters, subject to time, nature, and change. This is the gift of contemplating the body. It grounds us in reality. It strips away illusions. It opens the door to a deeper kind of freedom, the freedom of not clinging, not owning, not becoming. We no longer need to defend the body as if it were our identity. We can care for it with wisdom, knowing that it is a part of nature, not a possession. To observe the body without identifying with it is to begin a journey toward peace. Not a peace that depends on health or strength or appearance, but a peace that comes from seeing clearly. The breath comes and goes. The posture changes. The sensations rise and fall. And through it all, awareness remains, untouched, present, free. That awareness is not a self. It is not a soul. It is simply the knowing. And when the body is known as just the body, we begin to remember what it means to be truly alive. If the body is the most visible and physical part of our experience, feelings are the most immediate and compelling. Every moment, we are touched by sensations that register in the heart-mind as pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. These are not emotions in the complex psychological sense. They are the raw flavor of experience, the tone of how something feels when it touches our awareness. A soft breeze can be pleasant. A sharp sound can be unpleasant. A dull background hum might feel neutral. These tones arise automatically, effortlessly, without invitation. And yet, for most of us, they hold tremendous power. Why? Because we do not just feel, we cling to what feels good and resist what feels bad. From this simple pattern, entire cycles of craving, fear, addiction, aversion, and suffering are born. A pleasant feeling arises, and immediately the mind wants more of it. It begins to grasp, to chase, to hold. An unpleasant feeling arises, and the mind reacts, pushing it away, tightening, tensing, fighting. Even with neutral feelings, the mind may grow bored or restless, wanting stimulation. In this way, The raw experience of feeling becomes the spark that ignites the whole fire of suffering. The practice of contemplating feelings is to step into this space, the space between contact and reaction. It is to see the feeling arise, to name it for what it is, and to let it be. Not to suppress it, and not to indulge it. Just to know it. There is a pleasant feeling. There is an unpleasant feeling. There is a neutral feeling. With this simple recognition, the chain is broken. The mind no longer gets pulled into automatic reactivity. Awareness creates space, and space creates freedom. Feelings, when observed closely, reveal their impermanence. They do not last. That delightful taste on the tongue is gone in seconds. The irritation from a comment fades after a few minutes. Even deep joy or grief changes texture, intensity, shape. The mind often doesn't want to admit this. It holds on to pleasant feelings as if they can be preserved. It resists unpleasant ones as if they are a punishment. But both are just passing waves on the ocean of awareness. When we observe them with mindfulness, we begin to see this clearly, not just as a belief, but as a lived truth. One of the most liberating insights that arises from this contemplation is the understanding that feelings are not personal. They arise due to causes and conditions. A certain sound, a memory, a taste, a touch. All of these interact with the senses and give rise to a feeling tone. But none of them are yours in the deepest sense. They happen, just like the wind blows or the rain falls. To say, I am happy or I am sad, is to take ownership of a passing phenomenon. But if we train the mind to say, there is happiness or there is sadness, something powerful begins to shift. We start to unhook ourselves from the feeling. This does not mean becoming cold or detached. It does not mean rejecting feelings. On the contrary, it means being fully present with them, but without clinging. It means opening the heart to experience without being ruled by it. A pleasant feeling can be enjoyed without grasping. An unpleasant feeling can be endured without resentment. A neutral feeling can be known without boredom. In this way, the practice of feeling becomes a doorway to equanimity. Equanimity is not indifference. It is balance. It is the deep strength that comes from knowing that whatever arises will also pass. It is the wisdom that rests in the center of all things and does not get pulled to the extremes. This is not easy. Our habits of reactivity are strong. But with patience, with continuous observation, we can begin to loosen their grip. We begin to see how quickly the mind creates stories around feelings, narratives of blame, desire, identity, and how unnecessary those stories truly are. Imagine feeling a wave of anger. Instinctively, the mind might think, I am angry because they insulted me. But in mindfulness, we pause. We notice there is tension in the chest, heat in the face, pressure in the mind. There is an unpleasant feeling. It arises. It peaks. It changes. It fades. The more we watch, the more we understand. The insult was just sound. The anger was just a conditioned reaction. The story of me being wronged is optional. It is a mental creation. And without that story, the suffering begins to dissolve. The same is true for joy. We might feel uplifted by praise or success. The mind wants to hold on to that feeling, to repeat it, to make it last. But joy, too, is a passing wave. When we observe it as just a pleasant feeling, we can enjoy it deeply without fear of losing it. And when it passes, we do not suffer. This is the gift of non-attachment. We can feel fully without being enslaved by the feeling. Neutral feelings are perhaps the most difficult to notice. They do not scream or dazzle. They simply linger, quietly, often unnoticed. But they too have an impact. When we are unaware of neutral feelings, the mind may drift into dullness or seek stimulation to escape the boredom. But when we bring mindfulness to neutral feeling, it becomes a teacher. It shows us the craving for intensity. It reveals our tendency to overlook the ordinary. It invites us to rest in simplicity, to find contentment in stillness. Through the contemplation of feelings, the mind learns a new way of relating to experience. Instead of reacting, it observes. Instead of clinging, it lets go. Instead of becoming, it simply knows. This is not repression, it is freedom. It is the freedom of not being defined by passing sensations. It is the freedom of living in the center of awareness, where peace is not dependent on what is felt, but on how it is held. In time, This practice dissolves the belief that you are your emotions, that you are your joy, your pain, your numbness. It shows you that all of these are visitors, real, important, but not permanent and not personal. When the mind sees this clearly, suffering begins to lose its grip. Feelings come and go, but you are not swept away. You are the knowing, the awareness in which all things arise and pass. And in that awareness, there is space. There is balance. There is freedom. The mind is perhaps the most elusive and yet the most intimate part of our experience. Unlike the body, which can be touched and seen, or feelings, which have a flavor we can sense, the mind is like a river that never stays still. Thoughts flow, perceptions shift, moods arise and vanish, sometimes without warning. And yet, most people live as if the mind is their true self. They say, "I think, therefore I am." They cling to their opinions, defend their beliefs, and wrap their identity around what is happening inside the thinking space of awareness. But in truth, the mind is not a stable thing. It is a process, an ever-changing field of knowing that is influenced by countless causes and conditions. To observe the mind as just the mind, without identifying with it, is one of the most liberating practices we can undertake. When we begin this observation, the first step is to become aware of the state of the mind in the present moment. Is it calm or restless? Is it focused or distracted? Is it heavy or light, open or contracted? These are not judgments. They are simply descriptions. Just as a person looking at the sky might say, "There are clouds," or "The sky is clear," we look at the mind and say, "There is agitation," or "There is clarity." In this way, the mind becomes an object of awareness, not a master of identity. We begin to notice that the mind is constantly changing. One moment it is happy, the next it is irritated. One moment it is sleepy, the next it is alert. This is not a sign of weakness or instability. It is simply the nature of the mind. Thoughts come and go. Memories surface and fade. Desires arise and disappear. If we believe every mental state to be me, then we are constantly being pulled in different directions. But if we learn to observe the mind with mindfulness, we create space. We learn that we can witness a thought without becoming it. We can see anger in the mind without being consumed by it. We can notice confusion without drowning in it. This distinction is subtle but powerful. Most people think, "I am angry," or "I am afraid." But the practice invites a shift. Anger is present. Fear is present. There is a world of difference between the two. The first is identification. The second is observation. In the first, we are bound. In the second, we are free. When we observe the mind without identification, we begin to understand how impersonal it is. Thoughts arise due to causes. Maybe something we saw, something we remembered, something we fear. Emotions come not because we choose them, but because of the conditions surrounding us. Even the deepest intentions and beliefs are not ours in the way we imagine. They were shaped by family, culture, experience, biology, and 1,000 unseen influences. The mind, like the body, is a process, not a possession. This understanding can be unsettling at first. If I am not my thoughts, then who am I? If the mind is just a stream of conditioned events, then what is left? But these questions, though natural, are rooted in the same tendency toward identification that the practice seeks to uproot. The goal is not to find a new idea of self. The goal is to see through the illusion of self altogether. When we stop clinging to the mind as me, what remains is a quiet awareness, a knowing that is free from tension. It does not need to prove anything. It simply observes. Through this practice, we also begin to see the habitual patterns of the mind, the judgments, the comparisons, the expectations, the self-criticism. These patterns are so familiar that they often run unnoticed, like background music. But mindfulness brings them to light. We start to see, the mind is comparing again. The mind is chasing approval. The mind is spinning stories. And again, we don't judge or suppress, we just observe. In this observation, something miraculous happens. The patterns begin to loosen. The more we see them clearly, the less power they have. The mind is also subject to the influence of mental defilements, states like greed, hatred, and delusion. These are not moral judgments. They are forces that cloud the mind, that limit our clarity and wisdom. When the mind is filled with craving, it becomes narrow. When it is caught in anger, it becomes harsh. When it is lost in delusion, it becomes confused. But when these states are seen clearly, without ownership, they begin to dissolve. The mind returns to its natural openness. There is also great value in observing when wholesome states are present. A concentrated mind, a loving mind, a joyful or equanimous mind. These are not to be clung to, but they can be recognized and appreciated. Just as we note, this mind is restless, we can note, this mind is peaceful. In doing so, we strengthen our understanding of what supports clarity and freedom. We begin to nourish the conditions that allow the mind to settle. Over time, the practice becomes more refined. We no longer only observe the content of the mind, what thoughts are happening, but the nature of thinking itself. We begin to see how thoughts are constructed, how attention moves, how stories are born and die. We see how the mind creates a world of meaning with astonishing speed, and how that world collapses when we don't believe it. This insight into the constructed nature of thought is one of the deepest fruits of contemplation. It shows us that what we normally take as reality is often just the mind talking to itself. And yet, the mind is not an enemy. It is not something to fight or silence. It is a tool, a miraculous, mysterious instrument. But like all tools, it must be understood and handled with care. When the mind is not observed, it becomes the master, leading us into confusion and suffering. When the mind is observed with wisdom, it becomes a servant of clarity, compassion, and truth. In the end, the practice of observing the mind is not about gaining control. It is about releasing the need to control. It is about stepping back, letting go, and allowing the mind to be seen. When we do this, we begin to discover a spaciousness within, a silence that is not empty but alive, a presence that is not reactive but aware. And in that space, we are no longer trapped by thought. We are free to respond rather than react, to know rather than assume, to be, without the burden of becoming. The mind is just the mind. It is not who you are. When this truth is seen clearly, a profound peace begins to unfold, not the peace of escape, but the peace of knowing, directly and deeply, that you do not have to carry the weight of everything that passes through your awareness. You can simply let it come, let it go, and rest in the open space of mindful presence. In the final step of this deep contemplation, we turn our attention to what are often called the mental phenomena, the patterns, principles, and universal qualities that govern the flow of experience. These are not individual sensations, feelings, or thoughts, but the deeper structures and truths that underpin them all. Here, the practice becomes both broad and subtle. It is like stepping back from the surface of the river to observe how the entire current moves, how the riverbed shapes the flow, how rain from distant hills eventually forms the stream, and how unseen forces influence every ripple. This stage of contemplation invites a profound seeing into the laws of nature that govern our minds and lives. To begin this process, we develop a capacity to recognize what is arising in the field of experience, not just as a passing event, but as a type or category. For example, when desire arises, we do not only notice there is wanting, but also recognize it as a habitual force. This is the movement of craving. When anger arises, we don't just feel the heat. We acknowledge this is aversion. By doing so, we are no longer just passengers in the vehicle of the mind. We become observers of the system itself. We see patterns, causes, and effects. We begin to understand not just what is happening, but why. Mental phenomena include both wholesome and unwholesome states. When we begin to see these with clarity, without clinging or rejection, we develop insight. We notice how certain qualities lead to suffering, such as greed, hatred, and confusion, and how others lead to well-being, such as mindfulness, kindness, and equanimity. This is not about labeling thoughts as good or bad in a moral sense, but recognizing which mental energies bring contraction and which bring spaciousness. When we are caught in jealousy or restlessness, the mind feels tight. When there is compassion or clarity, the mind feels open and light. The practice is to see these states clearly, as they are, without becoming entangled in them. This clarity allows us to see not only individual states, but also the way experiences arise and pass away in dependence on conditions. This insight into conditionality is perhaps the most transformative understanding of all. Nothing we experience, no thought, emotion, or mood, exists independently. Everything is the result of causes. The anger that seems to appear suddenly may be the fruit of years of habits, of expectations unmet, of stories retold again and again. The joy that springs up may come from moments of stillness, from generosity, or from release. When we begin to see the chain of conditions that give birth to each experience, we stop blaming others, stop clinging to our stories, and start to rest in a deeper understanding of cause and effect. This vision of conditionality also reveals a powerful truth. Nothing is permanent. If something arises because of conditions, then when those conditions change, it must change too. This is not a philosophical idea. It is a truth we can observe directly. A moment of sadness arises, stays a while, and fades. A strong desire comes, grips us, and then dissolves. Even our sense of identity, which seems so fixed, is seen to be built upon shifting sands. This insight, when it is seen clearly, frees us from the illusion of a solid self. We begin to understand that there is no fixed me in any of this, just processes unfolding according to laws of nature. In this contemplative space, we also become aware of how clinging works. We see that much of our suffering arises not from the world itself, but from our attachment to mental phenomena, our attachment to views, to ideas, to roles we play, to stories we tell about who we are. When we believe these stories, they become prisons. But when we see them as just mental formations, just thoughts, just tendencies, they lose their power. The idea, I must be successful, or I am not good enough, is no longer taken as truth. It is just seen as another wave in the mind, arising and passing like all the rest. One of the most liberating realizations at this stage is that we don't have to fix the mind. We don't have to chase away every negative state or hold on to every positive one. We simply need to understand. With understanding comes freedom. When fear is seen as fear, not as something wrong or shameful, but as a natural response to conditions, it begins to loosen. When pride is seen as pride, not as who we are, but as something arising from deep conditioning, it loses its grip. This is the heart of transformation, seeing clearly without judgment. This contemplative practice also opens us to a deeper ethical awareness. We begin to see that the states of mind we cultivate do not just affect us, but ripple outward. A mind full of anger speaks words that hurt. A mind full of kindness radiates peace. In this way, mindfulness of mental phenomena becomes not just a path of insight, but a path of compassion. We begin to care not only for our own inner freedom, but for the well-being of others. We see that every action of body, speech, and mind matters, not because of rules or dogma, but because we see their consequences directly. At the most refined level, this contemplation brings us face to face with the nature of awareness itself. We begin to sense that there is a knowing behind all these changing phenomena, a silent, steady presence that is not caught in the rise and fall. This awareness does not judge or grasp. It simply knows. It is like the sky that holds all the weather, storms and sunlight, clouds and clear days, but is never affected by them. This is not a thing to cling to or define. It is not me or mine. But resting in this awareness, we begin to find a refuge that does not depend on conditions. And so, the observation of mental phenomena becomes a path of deep wisdom. We learn to see the processes of mind as impersonal, impermanent, and conditioned. We learn to let go of the stories, the identities, the battles. We rest more often in a space of clarity and peace. Life still unfolds. Joys and sorrows still arise, but we meet them with steadiness. We stop getting lost in the waves because we have learned to see the ocean. This is not an escape from life, but a return to it. A return to life as it truly is, fluid, rich, mysterious, and free from the burden of false selfhood. In seeing the mental phenomena for what they are, we learn not to fight our experience, but to understand it. And in understanding, we are freed, not through effort, but through seeing. Not through control, but through surrender to truth. As we arrive at the conclusion of this deep contemplation into the body, feelings, mind, and mental phenomena, something quiet yet profound begins to emerge, not merely intellectual understanding, not a doctrine to accept or reject, but a kind of silent knowing that transforms the way we relate to experience itself. What has been slowly unfolding throughout this path is a radical, life-changing insight that the suffering we experience is not caused by life itself, but by our identification with what arises. And once we begin to see clearly, to observe without attachment, we step into a freedom that is neither mystical nor abstract. It is immediate, simple, and deeply real. This freedom does not mean the absence of pain, difficulty, or emotion. Rather, it means the absence of bondage. We may still feel sadness, but we are not the sadness. Anger may arise, but it no longer defines us. Thoughts of doubt or fear may pass through the mind, but they are not taken to be the self. In this space of clarity, we see all things as they are, passing events in a stream of conditions. This is not detachment in the cold sense of indifference. It is the warm, open spaciousness of presence that no longer clings. Throughout this journey, we have learned to observe the body, not as a fixed object, but as a field of sensations constantly shifting. We've observed feelings, not as truths to obey, but as passing waves shaped by causes. We've examined the mind, not as an inner controller, but as a flowing process of reactions, perceptions, memories, and moods. And finally, we've seen the mental structures that frame all of this, not as ultimate realities, but as conditions arising and fading in a greater field of awareness. And through this simple act of observing, something extraordinary occurs. The grip of ego begins to dissolve. The illusion that there is a permanent self, a solid me at the center of it all, begins to lose its power. What remains is not a void, but a spacious presence. A presence that sees, that knows, that responds, but does not cling. This is the freedom of non-identification. A freedom that does not come from controlling experience, but from letting go of the need to make experience into something it is not. This realization touches every corner of life. It changes how we listen, how we speak, how we move through the world. We stop needing to prove anything, because there is no one left to defend. We stop being haunted by the past, because we no longer construct identity out of memory. We stop fearing the future, because there is no self to be protected. There is only now, alive, fluid, and open. And in this now, we begin to live from a place of stillness, even while the world continues to move. The most beautiful part of this freedom is that it is natural. It is not something to be added to us. It is already here, underneath all our grasping and fear. The practice is not about becoming something new, but uncovering what has always been present. The capacity to be aware without identification, to see, to feel, to think, to act, and yet not become bound by any of it. We are like the sky that allows all weather but remains untouched. This does not mean we no longer care. On the contrary, it is in this freedom that true compassion arises. When we are no longer lost in the small self, we are no longer trapped in comparison, judgment, or resentment. We can meet others as they are, not as projections of our fears or desires. We can be present in joy and sorrow, in birth and death, with an open heart. And this openness is not something we have to create. It is simply what remains when we stop holding on. As this insight deepens, even our spiritual practice changes. At first, we practice to gain something, peace, wisdom, enlightenment. But in time, we realize that true liberation is not gained, it is recognized. It is not the result of becoming something better. It is the result of letting go of what we are not. We begin to trust the unfolding of life. We begin to sit not to achieve, but to be present. We meditate not to escape the world, but to enter it more fully, with eyes open and heart awake. And when we truly see, even the ordinary moments become sacred. The sound of the wind through leaves, the warmth of water on the skin, the smile of a stranger. These are not just passing experiences. They are invitations to wake up, to step out of the dream of me and mine, and to rest in the truth of now. In this resting, there is no struggle, no one to defend, no future to chase, just the clear, luminous presence of life as it is. This freedom is not distant. It is not reserved for saints or sages. It is the natural result of observing without clinging, of seeing the body, feelings, mind, and mental phenomena as they are, not as who we are, but as what arises and passes in the field of awareness. We do not have to destroy the ego or fight the self. We simply need to stop believing in it. We need to see it clearly, gently, and repeatedly. And in that seeing, the illusion begins to dissolve. There will still be challenges. There will still be habits, emotions, and moments of confusion. But now, we meet them differently. We meet them as visitors, not as invaders. We meet them with interest, not resistance. And each time we return to awareness, to presence, to the simple seeing of what is, we return to our true refuge. A refuge that is not built, but discovered. A refuge that was never far away. This is the gift of the path, not the promise of perfection, but the promise of freedom. A freedom that is not found in avoiding life, but in meeting it without fear. In seeing its beauty, its impermanence, and its mystery without needing to hold on. And in this seeing, there is peace, not because everything is finally in control, but because we are no longer trying to control. We are simply here, awake and free. And so, we end where we began, with the body, with the breath, with this moment. But now, we see differently. Now, we rest in a knowing that is deeper than thought, deeper than identity. A knowing that simply watches, receives, and lets go. This is the heart of the path. This is the doorway to freedom. And it is always open.